This is the new 2020 Audi E-Tron Sportback, and it's a lot of things. It's a luxury SUV, and in fact one of those coupé luxury SUVs like the BMW X6. It's sporty, it has 400 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque. And it's electric. It'll go about 220 miles between charges. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my new online enthusiast car auction website for modern cool cars. If you're looking to sell a cool car from the modern era, sell it with Cars and Bids. You'll get the most interest and the most money for your cool car. And if you're looking to buy a cool modern enthusiast car, Cars and Bids is the place. We have daily auctions with amazing variety. Check it out at carsandbids.com. Now, I've already reviewed the regular Audi e-tron, and there are a lot of similarities here. Same basic sizing, same power, same 0 to 60 time of around 5.5 seconds. But there are some notable differences, the biggest of which is the styling, the design around back. The Sportback has this sloped roof that's coupier, and Audi hopes it's more enticing to their customers. It also helps improve the electric range. It's a more aerodynamic shape, and so it brings the range from the regular e-tron's 204 miles up to 218 miles for the Sportback. The Sportback model is also a little bit more expensive than the regular e-tron. A normal e-tron starts around $67,000. This one starts at $70,000. And today I'm going to review it. First, I'll take you on a tour of the e-tron Sportback and show you a few of its most interesting quirks and features. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. All right, time for the quirks and features of the e-tron Sportback. Now, I've already done a thorough review of the e-tron, the non-Sportback version, which has more in-depth quirks and features. I will link that in the description below. Here, I'm only going to go over some of the highlights, starting on the outside with the charging door, which is just cool. You can see right now there's this panel by the front fender. You press this part of it, and then the charging door drops down and reveals the charger, which is a cool look when you want to go and plug in your e-tron. You get a little smile on your face. Same deal when you climb into the e-tron. You open up the door and you can see it projects the word e-tron onto the ground next to you. So you're getting in this at night or in a parking garage, you can be reminded of your e-tron decision. But anyway, climb inside the e-tron. Probably the strangest thing in here is the gear lever, which is just weird. You have this sort of panel that comes out over the center console. And then on the left side of that panel, there's this silver piece that you can move forward or backwards to go reverse, neutral, or drive. That is your gear selector, just the silver part of this weirdly shaped panel. It is certainly one of the weirdest gear levers in the entire car industry. Audi only uses it on their e-tron models. The other Audi vehicles have a more traditional gear lever, but this one gets the weird one. And speaking of gears, this car does a funny thing when you go into drive or reverse. Specifically, it makes noise. Now, because it's an electric car, it is silent naturally, but Audi has added noises for pedestrian safety. And when you're going low speeds, it makes some strange noises. Here's the noise it makes when you shift into drive. That is a little bit of a curious noise, but it is not as unusual as the one you hear when you shift into reverse. Take a listen. These are weird, these noises, but again, Audi does it for pedestrian safety. The thinking is you're walking and an electric car is coming up behind you. Maybe you don't hear it because the engine doesn't make noise. So instead, it makes that strange noise. Interesting to see it. And next up, moving on from the gear lever, another interesting quirk in here is the center console itself, which is unusual compared to other Audi models because it's like deep. You have these silver bars on the side of the center console, which is pretty normal, but it's not flat. Instead, they're like several inches down down before you reach the floor of it. And on the floor, you can pull back this roll top and reveal your cup holders, which are pretty far set in there. It's kind of an unusual center console situation, but that's what the e-tron has. And this big hole in the center cannot be covered. It is always there. Again, a little weird. Now, as for the technology in this car, again, I covered this in my full review of the regular e-tron. I'm only going to hit a few high points here. For one thing, you have two center screens, an upper screen and a lower screen, and they are both touch screens. The lower screen is primarily used for climate control functions. You can see changing the temperature, changing the fan speed, the air placement, all that stuff. The upper screen has more traditional functions, basically everything you'd want, your media, radio, navigation, your phone. All that stuff is controlled on the upper screen. One of my favorite things about this setup is that if you go into the navigation system, when you search for a destination, you can actually write out your destination entry in the lower screen, and then it will recognize what you write and put it on the upper screen and then send you there. That is a pretty cool touch, and it's a good argument for why the climate control screen should be a screen and not buttons, because they can make it more dynamic, make it do more stuff. And next up, we move on to the cargo area in the e-tron. You can see it has a nice wide flat floor, well sized, although space is kind of robbed by its sportback. This sloping back look kind of steals space for taller items. If you want to put big stuff in here, you might have trouble fitting it, although there are some hidden storage compartments in the e-tron worth noting. One is under the cargo area floor. You have a spare tire there, like a lot of cars, but you also have a relatively large additional cargo area under there where you can put stuff if you want to keep it out of sight, or if you just run out of room in the regular cargo area. And you also have storage up front. This is an electric car, there's no gasoline engine, so open up the hood and you can see there's this plastic compartment. Open up that and there's storage there. Not much storage, it's small and it's relatively shallow, but you can get a few more items in there if you can't get them in the back of the Sportback. And by the way, since I'm talking about the front of this car, I should mention the grille, which is very distinctive. It has kind of the look of other Audi grilles, but the center is grayed out basically, and that's of course because you don't really need airflow into the engine to cool it down, since this car doesn't have an engine. It's just batteries and electric. So they have the Audi grille on there, but it's not really necessary. It's just there for continuity with other Audi models. And by the way, since I'm talking about the front of the Sportback, I want to mention the turn signal, which is cool up front. You can see it sort of sweeps across the front. Another example of good Audi lighting design. For so long, lights have been this sort of regulatory safety feature that nobody paid that much attention to, and Audi and other brands have made cool things out of their lights, and this is a good example. It's just nice to kind of see it there, looking cooler than a regular turn signal. And finally, we move on to the back of the Sportback, and sitting back here, there's an interesting surprise in terms of rear seat room. Legroom is pretty good. That's not really all that surprising. This is a reasonably sized vehicle. The real shock is headroom, which is excellent. Usually my complaint about these sloped roof coupe SUV things is when I sit in the back seat, my head is right up against the ceiling. But in this car, that's not true. If I sit normally, I still have about an inch before my head is hitting the ceiling. That's pretty good for a sloping roof SUV. So you can get the Sportback if you like the look and not compromise on rear seat room, which isn't always the case with these sloping back SUVs. And speaking of the sloping back SUV, let's talk about the styling of this vehicle. I think it's fine. I don't love the slope back coupe looking SUVs, but this one does it reasonably well, about as well as any. The real benefit though is electric range. There's a reason all electric and hybrid vehicles are shaped this way. The Tesla Model Y, the Model 3, the Prius, the Honda Insight, the Clarity, blah, blah, blah. They all look like this because this sweeping look gives vehicles more range, and that's clearly proven here. The regular Audi e-tron, which isn't even really that squared off in the first place, gets like 204 miles of range. This gets like 218, and that's a pretty big boost for just a design change, which is why Tesla and all the other brands just use this teardrop shape in all of their vehicles. It just gives them more electric range. So the coupe looking SUV thing is certainly here to stay as long as more and more electric vehicles keep coming out. All right, driving the e-tron Sportback. I'm gonna floor it. Woo-hee! It feels quicker. Audi says 0 to 60 in 5.5. Feels quicker than that. I know electric cars generally feel pretty quick. because of the instant torque thing, but woo! That feels unusually quick. So the biggest competitor for the E-Tron Sportback is undoubtedly the Tesla Model Y. And it's a good competitor to this car. There's some pros and cons. On paper, the Model Y certainly seems like the better of the two. It has a longer range and it has a lower starting price. And, you know, that's a lot of what people are looking for. But tech is another big benefit. And in that situation, the e-tron has some advantages and the Model Y has some advantages. The screen setup in here has gotten to the point where it's just as good as Tesla's, if not better. The legacy car companies have really started to catch up. Audi, Mercedes-Benz especially, have really started to catch up to Tesla. And at this point, the gauge cluster screen that you can fully configure and make the map huge, and this whole screen setup in the center, it's all pretty good, really good in fact. And so I don't necessarily think that Tesla has a big advantage there anymore. In addition, the e-tron also has some other good benefits like ventilated seats, which you can't get in a Model Y, and there's other little stuff like that that luxury cars tend to have that the Model Y just, we don't need it, and it's nice to have actually. But at the end of the day, the Model Y is faster, more powerful, more exciting for less money, and it has a longer range. So that's a little bit hard to justify. And of course, it also has autopilot, which is a really big deal. Nonetheless, one big benefit of the e-tron, I've noticed that these are really available with some bargain prices, bargain deals, both lease deals and purchase deals. And at some price, this really does start to make sense. Keep in mind, in addition to the benefit of, the tech maybe is a little bit better in this car, you also get a real automaker, making vehicles in a real factory. And I know Tesla people are going to complain that I'm complaining about that, but there is build quality issues. There's no question with a lot of Tesla models, you just don't quite have that with vehicles like this. Overall, though, I would say the e-tron Sportback is a good effort from Audi, certainly among the better electric vehicle and electric SUV, especially efforts I've seen, aside from the Model Y, which is really just a fantastic vehicle. But this is relatively competitive, surprisingly enjoyable and engaging and quick, good technology. I just wish the range was a little bit longer for the price. To me, that's sort of its biggest drawback. It's quite a bit behind Tesla, and I just frankly wish it wasn't. And so that's the Audi E-Tron Sportback. This and the regular e-tron are both appealing luxury electric crossovers, although they're behind the Tesla Model Y in terms of tech and range for the money. Still, they're worth a look, especially if you can get a good deal. And now it's time to give the E-Tron Sportback a DOUGSCORE. And the DOUGSCORE is here against some other plug-in SUVs and Audi crossovers. The e-tron Sportback is fine, but frankly I prefer the regular e-tron. You lose only a few miles of range, but you gain a nicer looking car, in my opinion, more cargo space, and a lower price of entry. And those benefits are reflected in the DOUGSCORE. Overall though, the Tesla Model Y is the clear winner in this segment. It's cheaper with better performance and better range and arguably better tech, and of course the ever increasingly desirable Tesla brand name. The e-tron Sportback is a nice EV crossover, but Tesla is still the gold standard.